Welcome to deep science sleep. Let the weight of your body sink deeper into whatever surface holds you. Feel the gentle pull of gravity, that constant companion keeping you grounded, keeping you safe. Tonight, we're going on a journey through time, but there's no rush, no destination that can't wait. Just the slow unfurling of a story that's been 10,000 years in the making. A story about creatures who walk beside us, who curl up in patches of afternoon sunlight, who watch us with eyes that hold secrets from ancient deserts and forgotten kingdoms. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing find its own rhythm, natural and easy, like waves lapping at a shore you can't quite see. And as we drift backward through the centuries, through the millennia, know that you can rest here, suspended in this moment, while the story flows over and around you like warm water. The puzzle of the cat. There is something deeply strange about the cat. You know this already if you've ever lived with one. The way they occupy space in your home as if they're doing you a favor by their presence. The way they switch in an instant from affectionate companion to aloof observer, as though remembering some ancient dignity that shouldn't be compromised by too much enthusiasm. They are domesticated, yes. They live in our houses, eat from bowls we fill, sleep on furniture we provide. And yet there's something wild that never quite left them. Something that makes them fundamentally different from every other animal we've brought into our homes. Dogs look at us and see pack leaders, companions, sources of joy and purpose. Horses respond to our training, our commands, our partnership. Cows, sheep, pigs, chickens, all have been transformed by domestication into creatures quite unlike their wild ancestors. All except the cat. The domestic cat, Felis catus, is essentially the same animal it was 10,000 years ago. Its genome remains virtually identical to that of its wild ancestor. Its behaviors, its instincts, its very essence has resisted the transforming force of domestication that reshaped nearly every other animal that shares our space. This is the mystery we're about to explore. Not just how cats became our companions, but why they never really became our subjects. Why they maintained, across millennia of living alongside humans, a fierce independence that sometimes makes us wonder who domesticated whom. This is a story written in bones found at archaeological sites, in DNA sequences that stretch back through genetic lineages, in ancient paintings on tomb walls, and in the pupils of the cat watching you from across the room right now. It's a story of mutual benefit, accidental partnership, and an arrangement so unusual that scientists themselves debate whether cats were ever truly domesticated at all, or whether they simply decided that living near humans wasn't the worst idea. Think about the implications of this for a moment. Every other animal we've brought into our homes has been transformed by the process. We've bred dogs into hundreds of forms, from chihuahuas that fit in a handbag to Great Danes that can look you in the eye while you're standing. We've bred cattle to produce enormous quantities of milk, sheep to grow thick fleeces, chickens to lay eggs daily. We've reshaped these animals to serve our purposes, and in doing so, we've made them dependent on us. A dairy cow released into the wild wouldn't last long. A modern chicken, bred for rapid growth and high egg production, faces the same fate. But a house cat? Release it into a suitable habitat and within days it's hunting successfully, establishing a territory, surviving perfectly well without any human assistance. Feral cat colonies around the world prove this constantly. From the alleyways of Rome to the beaches of Hawaii to the industrial zones of Tokyo, cats live independently, hunt for their food, raise their kittens, and maintain stable populations across generations. They don't need us. They never really have. So why do they stay? Why do hundreds of millions of cats choose to live in human homes, to accept food from our hands, to purr in our laps, to tolerate being petted and carried and sometimes dressed in ridiculous outfits? The answer to that question requires understanding not just what we did to cats, but what they were before they ever encountered humans. It requires understanding their evolutionary history, their sensory world, their instincts and drives that were refined long before the first agricultural settlements created the conditions for our unusual partnership. To understand this mystery, we need to go back, way back. Before the first cities, before the first farms, before the first human ever set out food for a hungry feline and hoped it might stay. We need to understand what cats were before they were cats as we know them. We need to meet their ancestors, track their journey from wild hunters to fireside companions who still dream of the hunt. And we need to understand the unique evolutionary path that led to the animal purring on your lap or prowling through your hallway at 3 in the morning, seized by some ancient urgency you'll never fully understand. So let's begin at the beginning, or at least as close to it as the fossil record and genetic evidence will allow. Let's travel back to a time when the ancestors of our modern cats were purely wild, purely themselves, unburdened by any association with humans. Let's meet the wildcats of Africa and the Middle East, the true beginning of this peculiar story. #the ancient origins, before domestication. The story of cats begins not thousands but millions of years ago. The family Felidae, to which all living cat species belong, emerged somewhere between 10 and 15 million years ago during the Miocene epoch. This was a world dramatically different from ours. The continents were still shifting into their modern positions. Grasslands were expanding across the planet. And in this changing world, a new kind of predator was evolving. The first true cats evolved from a creature called Proailurus, a small civet-like predator that lived about 30 million years ago. Proailurus was not yet a cat as we would recognize one, but it possessed the fundamental architecture that would define the feline family. Sharp teeth suited for a meat-based diet, flexible bodies capable of sudden bursts of speed, and keen senses for detecting prey. From this ancient ancestor, the cat family tree began to branch and spread. By around 10 to 12 million years ago, the Felidae family had split into the major lineages we recognize today. 8 phylogenetic lineages emerged, spreading across Africa, Asia, and eventually the Americas. These included the big cats of the Panthera lineage: lions, tigers, leopards, and jaguars, as well as smaller wildcat species that would eventually include the domestic cat's ancestors. This diversification was rapid in evolutionary terms, with species adapting to remarkably different ecological niches across the globe. But our story focuses on one particular lineage, the Felis lineage. This group of small wildcats spread throughout Africa, Asia, and parts of Europe, adapting to various habitats from forests to grasslands to semi-arid regions. They were and remain solitary hunters. Unlike the social lions with their prides or the pack-hunting wolves, these small cats lived alone, defending territories, hunting prey they could kill by themselves, meeting other cats only to mate or, in the case of females, to raise their young until those young were ready to strike out on their own. Within the Felis lineage, we find the African wildcat, Felis sylvestris libica. This is where the trail gets warm, where archaeology, DNA analysis, and behavioral studies all converge to tell us. Here is where domestic cats come from. Not from all wildcats, but from this specific subspecies, living in a specific part of the world at a specific moment in human history. The African wildcat looked remarkably similar to many modern domestic cats. In fact, if you encountered one today, you might mistake it for a somewhat lean, slightly larger domestic tabby. They typically weighed between 8 and 15 pounds. Their coats ranged from sandy brown to gray, often with subtle stripes or spots that provided camouflage in their natural habitats. Their tails were long, their ears pointed, their eyes large and expressive. They were, in short, already quite cat-like. These wildcats occupied a broad range across North Africa and the Near East, from Egypt through the Levant and into parts of Arabia. They thrived in semi-arid environments where they could find both prey and adequate shelter. Rock outcrops, scattered vegetation, areas near water sources. These were the territories where wildcats established their hunting grounds. They were crepuscular, most active at dawn and dusk when many of their prey species were also active. Small rodents made up the bulk of their diet, though they would also take birds, reptiles, and large insects when the opportunity arose. The hunting style of these wildcats was already refined to perfection. They were ambush predators, relying on patience, stealth, and explosive bursts of speed rather than endurance chases. A wildcat would spot potential prey, freeze, lower its body close to the ground, and wait. The muscles would coil, the pupils would dilate to take in every detail of the target's movements. Then, in a fraction of a second, the cat would explode forward, powerful hind legs propelling it across the distance separating hunter from hunted. Sharp claws would extend to grip the prey. Sharp teeth would deliver a killing bite to the neck or spine, and the meal would be secured. This hunting technique was so effective, so energy efficient, that it essentially hasn't changed to this day. Watch a house cat stalking a toy mouse, and you're watching behavior patterns refined over millions of years. The wiggling hindquarters before the pounce, the slow, deliberate movements during the stalk, the sudden acceleration. All of this comes from those ancient wildcats who needed to make every hunt count because failed hunts meant going hungry. These wildcats were also fiercely territorial and solitary. Males would maintain territories that overlapped with several females' territories, but they avoided each other outside of breeding season. Females raised their kittens alone, teaching them to hunt, defending them from predators, and eventually driving them away when it was time for the young cats to establish their own territories. This independence, this lack of pack structure or hierarchical organization, would prove crucial to the story of domestication. There was no alpha cat to subordinate, no group dynamics to manipulate, no social structure that humans could slot themselves into the way they did with dogs. The African wildcat senses were already supremely adapted for its lifestyle. Their vision was optimized for low-light conditions, allowing them to hunt effectively at dawn and dusk. A reflective layer behind the retina, called the tapetum lucidum, bounced light back through the retina a second time, essentially giving the cat's eye two chances to capture each photon. This is what causes that eerie eye shine when light hits a cat's eyes at night. The tapetum acts like a mirror, reflecting light back out and creating that otherworldly glow. Their hearing was equally impressive. The external ear, or pinna, could rotate independently, swiveling to pinpoint the source of sounds and what sounds they could detect. While humans hear frequencies up to about 20,000 hertz, wildcats could detect sounds up to around 64,000 hertz. This meant they could hear the ultrasonic vocalizations of rodents, the high-pitched rustling of small prey moving through grass or sand. They could judge the location of a sound to within a few inches at a distance of several feet, invaluable for hunting prey that often remained hidden from sight. Their whiskers, or vibrissae, were another critical sensory tool. These specialized hairs, much thicker than regular fur and with roots 3 times deeper in the skin, were loaded with nerve endings. They detected the slightest air movements, allowed the cat to navigate in complete darkness, and could even determine whether an opening was wide enough for the cat's body to pass through. In effect, the whiskers created a 3-dimensional map of the cat's immediate surroundings, supplementing vision and hearing with tactile information. Even the wildcat's grooming behavior served multiple purposes beyond cleanliness. By licking their fur, they distributed oils from skin glands, maintaining the coat's waterproofing and insulation properties. They removed parasites and debris. They also left their scent on their own body, reinforcing their individual scent signature. Cats have scent glands on their faces, paws, and at the base of their tails, and they used these to mark territory by rubbing against objects or other cats. All of these traits, all of these finely tuned adaptations, existed before humans entered the picture. The African wildcat was already a sophisticated predator, already perfectly suited to its ecological niche. It didn't need humans. It had survived and thrived for hundreds of thousands of years without any assistance from our species. So how did these independent, self-sufficient hunters end up living in our homes? The answer lies not in what humans did to cats, but in what humans did to the landscape. About 12,000 years ago, something profound began to change in human society, particularly in a region known as the Fertile Crescent. And this change would create conditions that even an independent wildcat might find too advantageous to ignore. The first encounters, the Fertile Crescent. Picture the Near East approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago. The region known as the Fertile Crescent, stretching from the Nile Valley through modern-day Israel, Lebanon, Syria, parts of Turkey, and down through Iraq to the Persian Gulf, was experiencing a transformation that would reshape human civilization. This was the Neolithic Revolution, the transition from nomadic hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural communities. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had moved with the seasons, following game, gathering wild plants, living in small mobile groups. But in the Fertile Crescent, people began to settle in one place. They started cultivating wild grains, wheat and barley primarily, selecting seeds from the most productive plants, saving them, planting them deliberately. The first farms appeared. The first permanent villages took shape. And with them came a fundamental change in how humans interacted with their environment. Settled agriculture created something that had never existed before: large-scale food storage. When you're nomadic, you can only carry what you can eat relatively quickly. But when you're settled, you can harvest grain, store it in granaries, and have food available throughout the year. This was revolutionary. It allowed human populations to grow. It enabled specialization. Some people could farm while others could craft tools, make pottery, weave cloth. It was, in many ways, the foundation of civilization as we know it. But there was a problem, one that the early farmers might not have anticipated, but one that quickly became apparent. Stored grain attracted rodents. House mice, in particular, found these granaries to be an embarrassment of riches. A reliable food source, available year-round, protected from the elements. Mouse populations exploded around these early agricultural settlements. Now, imagine you're an African wildcat living in the semi-arid regions near the Fertile Crescent. You're a solitary hunter, and your primary prey is rodents. You've evolved to catch them, evolved to detect their movements, evolved to ambush them with devastating efficiency. And suddenly, from your perspective, something miraculous happens. The rodents aren't scattered across the landscape anymore, requiring you to cover large territories to find enough to eat. They're concentrated, hugely concentrated, all gathered around these strange structures that these odd bipedal apes have built. This is a no-brainer from the cat's perspective. Why work harder when you can work smarter? Why roam across several square miles of territory when you can hang around these human settlements and have the prey come to you? The wildcats began to lurk around the edges of agricultural communities. They hunted the mice that swarmed the granaries. They probably scavenged from refuse piles as well. Early agricultural settlements would have had waste disposal areas where food scraps accumulated. And here's where the story gets interesting, because from the human perspective, these wildcats were performing a service. They were controlling the rodent population that threatened the grain stores. A substantial portion of stored grain could be lost to mice, so having predators that kept mouse numbers in check was valuable. The wildcats didn't need to be fed. They didn't need to be managed. They simply showed up, did their thing, and the mouse problem was less severe. This was the beginning of what scientists call a commensal relationship. Commensalism is when one species benefits from another without significantly affecting it. The cats benefited from the concentrated food source. The humans benefited from the pest control. And critically, neither species had to change much to maintain this arrangement. The cats remained wild. The humans didn't have to actively do anything beyond tolerating the presence of these helpful hunters. Over time, something interesting happened. Not all wildcats could tolerate proximity to humans equally well. Some were too skittish, too frightened of these two-legged creatures to stay close to settlements. Others were bolder, more tolerant of human presence. And these bolder cats had a distinct advantage. They had better access to the mice around the granaries. They were more successful hunters because they could operate in the richest hunting grounds. This created a selection pressure, but not one imposed by humans. This was natural selection. Bolder, less fearful cats were more successful. They ate better, they were healthier, and when they reproduced, they passed on whatever genetic and behavioral traits contributed to their boldness. Generation after generation, the cats that hung around human settlements became incrementally more tolerant of human presence. Not domesticated, not tame, but less wild. Or perhaps more accurately, wild in a way that was compatible with living near humans. The archaeological evidence supports this narrative. The oldest clear evidence of cats living alongside humans comes from Cyprus, an island in the Mediterranean. Around 9,500 years ago, someone buried a cat with a human. The grave was discovered by archaeologists in 2004, and it's remarkable for several reasons. First, cats are not native to Cyprus. They don't swim. This means humans brought them to the island deliberately. Second, the cat was buried with care alongside the human, suggesting some kind of relationship beyond simple pest control. This person valued this cat enough to include it in their burial. This cypress burial is remarkable not just for its age, but for what it reveals about the human-cat relationship. The grave contained a human skeleton laid on its right side. Next to it, about 40 centimeters away, was a cat skeleton in a similar position. The grave goods included tools, jewelry, and other items suggesting this was a person of some status in their community. The deliberate placement of the cat, the care taken in the burial, suggests this wasn't just convenient disposal of a dead animal. This cat mattered to someone. What makes this even more significant is the geography. Cyprus is an island, and it's been an island for at least 5 million years, long before any felines evolved. There are no native wildcats on Cyprus. Every cat on the island had to be brought there by humans. This means that by 9,500 years ago, humans valued cats enough to transport them by boat to a new territory. They weren't just tolerating cats hanging around their grain stores. They were actively bringing cats with them when they migrated. Archaeological evidence from other sites in the Near East supports a growing relationship between humans and cats during this period. Cat bones begin appearing more frequently at settlement sites from around 9,000 to 8,000 years ago. Some of these bones show butchery marks, suggesting cats were occasionally eaten, but many do not, suggesting the cats were living in and around settlements as commensal animals rather than as food sources. The size of these ancient cat bones is interesting. They're generally smaller than wildcat bones from the same regions and periods, but not as small as modern domestic cats. This suggests a population in transition, cats that were beginning to adapt to human presence and possibly beginning to undergo subtle changes in response to this new ecological niche, but not yet fully domesticated in appearance. Genetic analysis provides another line of evidence. When scientists extract and analyze DNA from these ancient cat remains, they find genetic signatures that link them to modern domestic cats, but also to local wildcat populations. This confirms that domestication was happening in the Fertile Crescent, drawing from the local wildcat gene pool. The genetic data also suggests that there wasn't a single domestication event where someone captured a wildcat and started a breeding program. Instead, it was a gradual process with ongoing gene flow between wild and commensal cat populations. This pattern of gradual integration makes biological sense. The early agricultural settlements of the Fertile Crescent weren't large, walled cities. They were small villages, often with fewer than a few hundred inhabitants. The boundary between settlement and wilderness would have been permeable. Wildcats could come and go freely. Some would venture close to human habitations to hunt the abundant mice. Others would remain in the wild. Over time, the cats that were more tolerant of human presence would have had better access to this rich food source and would have been more successful. But they weren't captured or confined. They could still interbreed with wild populations. The distinction between wild and commensal would have been fuzzy, more a matter of individual behavior and local population variation than a sharp species-level division. DNA evidence has allowed scientists to trace the origins of domestic cats with remarkable precision. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA and nuclear genetic markers from cats around the world consistently points back to the Near East as the origin of domestication. Specifically, to populations of Felis sylvestris libica from the Fertile Crescent region. All domestic cats, regardless of breed or location, share genetic markers with wild cats from this specific area. What's particularly interesting is that the genetic evidence suggests domestic cats arose from a relatively small founder population. Unlike some domesticated species where multiple populations were domesticated independently, cats appear to have been domesticated, if we can even use that word, in one place, one time. From there, they spread, following human trade routes, accompanying people as they migrated and settled new regions. The timing also aligns remarkably well with the agricultural revolution. The earliest evidence of cat-human association dates to roughly the same period when agriculture was taking hold in the Fertile Crescent. This isn't coincidence. Agriculture created the conditions, the concentrated rodent populations, that made it advantageous for wildcats to tolerate human proximity. Before agriculture, there wouldn't have been enough benefit to offset the cost of living near these potentially dangerous two-legged creatures. But we should be careful about romanticizing this process. These early cats weren't house pets. They weren't tame. They were wild animals that had discovered an ecological niche that happened to overlap with human settlements. Some researchers prefer to say that cats domesticated themselves, emphasizing that this was not a process driven primarily by human selection. Humans didn't go out and capture wildcats to tame them. They didn't selectively breed cats for desired traits. The cats came to them, drawn by the mice, and stayed because the arrangement worked. Over time, this arrangement became more established. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. Agriculture spread throughout the Fertile Crescent and beyond. And wherever grain was stored, wherever human settlements created concentrations of rodents, cats followed. They were the original pest control, living their own lives, maintaining their own territorial boundaries, but doing so in the spaces between and around human habitation. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, some of these cats became more accustomed to humans. They learned that people weren't usually threats. They discovered that in addition to the mice, there might be other food sources, scraps, offerings, perhaps even deliberate feeding. The boldest, most adaptable cats thrived. And as they thrived, they passed on their genes, including whatever genetic variations contributed to their tolerance of humans. There's debate among scientists about when cats transitioned from commensal animals to truly domesticated ones. Some argue it happened relatively quickly, within a few thousand years of the first agricultural settlements. Others suggest it was a much slower process, with truly domesticated cats only emerging in the last few thousand years. The truth is likely somewhere in between, and probably varies by region. What we do know is that by the time ancient civilizations like Egypt emerged, cats were already established as part of human society. Not as equals, not quite as pets in the modern sense, but as familiar companions. Animals that lived in and around homes, that were valued for their hunting prowess, and that had begun to occupy a unique ecological and cultural niche that no other animal quite filled. But before we journey to Egypt and explore the sacred status cats would achieve there, we need to understand what made these animals so remarkable. What were the adaptations, the physical and behavioral traits that made cats such effective hunters and such unusual companions? Let's explore the remarkable toolkit that evolution had equipped cats with long before they ever encountered humans. Remarkable adaptations, the hunter's toolkit. The domestic cat is, in many ways, a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. Every aspect of its body, every sense, every instinct has been refined over millions of years to create one of nature's most efficient predators. Understanding these adaptations helps explain not just how cats hunt, but why they behave the way they do, even in the comfort of our modern homes. Let's start with vision, one of the cat's most remarkable senses. A cat's eyes are proportionally enormous compared to its head. If humans had eyes in the same proportion, they would be about 3 inches in diameter. These large eyes serve a specific purpose, gathering as much light as possible. This is crucial for an animal that hunts primarily at dawn and dusk, during the crepuscular periods when light levels are low but prey is most active. The structure of the cat's eye is optimized for low-light conditions in several ingenious ways. The retina, the light-sensitive layer at the back of the eye, contains 2 types of photoreceptor cells, rods and cones. Rods detect light intensity and work well in dim conditions but don't detect color. Cones detect color and fine detail but require brighter light. Humans have a fairly balanced distribution of rods and cones. Cats, however, have a retina dominated by rods, about 6 to 8 times more rods than a human eye. This rod-heavy retina means cats are extraordinarily sensitive to dim light. They require only 1/6 the amount of light that humans need to see. In the twilight hours when humans are squinting and stumbling, cats see almost as clearly as if it were daylight. This is perfect for hunting the small mammals and birds that are most active during these low-light periods. Then there's the tapetum lucidum, that reflective layer behind the retina we mentioned earlier. The tapetum is made of specialized cells containing zinc or riboflavin, arranged in layers that act like microscopic mirrors. When light passes through the retina, any photons that weren't absorbed by the rods and cones hit the tapetum and bounce back through the retina for a second pass. This effectively doubles the eye's light-gathering ability. It's why cats' eyes glow in the dark when light shines on them. You're seeing light that passed through the retina twice before reflecting back out. The trade-off for this exceptional low-light vision is reduced visual acuity in bright light. Cats don't see fine detail as well as humans do. While human vision is typically 20/20ths, cat vision ranges from 20/100 to 20/200. What a human can see clearly at 100 to 200 feet, a cat needs to be 20 feet away to see with the same clarity. But for a predator that ambushes prey from a few feet away, ultrafine detail isn't as important as motion detection and depth perception. And cats excel at detecting motion. Their visual system is wired to notice even the slightest movement. A mouse twitching its tail 50 feet away will immediately capture a cat's attention, even if the cat might not see the fine details of the mouse's features. This motion sensitivity is so acute that it sometimes seems like cats are watching things we can't see. Often they are tiny insects, dust motes, subtle movements of air currents causing slight displacements of objects. The cat's pupil is another marvel. Unlike the circular human pupil, the cat's pupil is a vertical slit. This design allows for much finer control over the amount of light entering the eye. In bright conditions, the pupil can narrow to a tiny slit, protecting the sensitive retina from overexposure. In darkness, it can dilate enormously, becoming almost perfectly round and filling nearly the entire visible portion of the eye. This exceptional range of pupil dilation gives cats tremendous flexibility in operating across different light conditions. Research also suggests that cats, like many predators with forward-facing eyes, see the world with excellent depth perception. Their eyes are positioned to provide significant binocular overlap. The visual fields from each eye overlap, creating stereoscopic vision that allows the brain to calculate distances accurately. This is crucial for a predator that needs to judge the distance to prey with precision before making that explosive pounce. Moving beyond vision, let's talk about hearing. The cat's sense of hearing is nothing short of extraordinary. Those mobile, cone-shaped ears can rotate 180 degrees, independently of each other, to pinpoint the source of sounds. The external ear, or pinna, acts like a satellite dish, capturing sound waves and funneling them into the ear canal. But it's the range of hearing that's truly impressive. While humans can hear sounds ranging from about 20 to 20,000 hertz, cats hear from around 45 hertz up to 64,000 hertz. That upper range is remarkable. It's nearly 2 octaves above human hearing and even higher than dogs, who can hear up to about 45,000 hertz. Why such extreme high-frequency hearing? Because cats' primary prey, rodents, communicate using ultrasonic vocalizations. Mice and rats make squeaks and chirps well above the range of human hearing. They can hear these prey animals communicating, fighting, moving, and navigating. It's like having access to a secret radio frequency that broadcasts the location and activity of every mouse in the vicinity. The cat's ability to locate sounds is equally impressive. Those independently rotating ears work together to triangulate the source of a sound. A cat can pinpoint the location of a sound to within about 3 inches at a distance of 3 feet. Watch a cat's ears when it hears something interesting. They swivel and adjust, making constant microcorrections as the cat's brain processes the acoustic information and calculates the precise location of the sound source. Then we have the whiskers, or vibrissae, which deserve their own extensive discussion. Whiskers aren't just longer, thicker hairs. They're exquisitely sensitive tactile sensors. Each whisker is embedded in a follicle that's packed with nerve endings and surrounded by specialized tissue that can detect the slightest displacement of the whisker. The whisker follicles are also connected to muscles that allow the cat to move the whiskers forward or back. Cats have whiskers in several locations. The prominent ones on either side of the nose, smaller ones above the eyes, on the cheeks, and even on the backs of their front legs. The whiskers are roughly as wide as the cat's body, which allows the cat to use them to judge whether an opening is wide enough to squeeze through. If the whiskers fit, the body will fit. But whiskers do much more than measure width. They detect air currents, allowing the cat to sense the movement of prey even in complete darkness. They create a tactile map of the cat's immediate surroundings. When a cat is moving through a narrow space or investigating something close-up, the whiskers provide crucial spatial information. Some researchers believe the information from the whiskers is processed in a region of the brain similar to the visual cortex, suggesting that cats might be able to see with their whiskers in a sense, building a three-dimensional map of their environment through touch. The sense of smell, while not as acute as a dog's, is still approximately 14 times more sensitive than a human's. Cats have about 67 million scent receptors in their noses compared to around 5 million in humans. They also possess a specialized scent organ that humans lack, the vomeronasal organ, or Jacobson's organ, located in the roof of the mouth. This organ detects pheromones and other chemical signals. When a cat opens its mouth slightly, draws air in, and appears to be grimacing, it's called the Flamen response, and it's directing air over the vomeronasal organ to analyze scents more carefully. Scent plays an enormous role in how cats perceive their world. While we navigate primarily by sight and sound, cats integrate scent information into their understanding of their environment constantly. Every surface a cat rubs against receives a deposit of scent from facial glands. Every place a cat scratches gets marked with scent from glands in the paws. Even the cat's urine contains complex information about the cat's health, reproductive status, and identity. To a cat, the world is rich with scent trails and markers invisible to us. That spot on the carpet where your cat always stops and sniffs? There might be a scent marker there, left by another cat weeks ago, still detectable to the cat's sensitive nose. When your cat rubs its face against the corner of the couch, it's not just being affectionate with the furniture. It's marking territory, claiming this space as familiar and safe. The sense of taste, interestingly, is somewhat limited in cats compared to many other mammals. Cats lack functional taste receptors for sweetness. This isn't an accident or a quirk. It's a consequence of being obligate carnivores, animals that must eat meat to survive. Unlike omnivores, who benefit from being able to taste and enjoy sweet fruits and vegetables, cats have no nutritional use for sugar or plant-based carbohydrates. Their digestive systems are optimized for processing protein and fat from prey animals. This loss of sweet taste receptors represents a deletion mutation in the gene responsible for one component of the sweetness receptor. Because cats had no evolutionary pressure to maintain this gene, they weren't eating sweet foods anyway. The mutation persisted and eventually became fixed in the entire cat family. Every cat, from house cats to lions, lacks the ability to taste sweetness. This helps explain why cats are often indifferent to fruit or sweet treats that would interest dogs or humans. Now let's talk about the cat's body itself, that marvel of flexibility and explosive power. The cat skeleton contains more bones than the human skeleton, approximately 230 compared to our 206. Many of these extra bones are in the tail and the spine. The spine is remarkably flexible, thanks to special elastic discs between the vertebrae and a lack of the rigid connections that make other animal spines less mobile. This flexibility allows cats to twist and rotate their bodies mid-air, to squeeze through impossibly tight spaces, and to arch their backs dramatically when threatened. The shoulders are particularly interesting. Unlike humans and many other animals, cats don't have a functional collarbone. They have a small vestigial bone, but it's not connected to other bones the way a human collarbone is. This free-floating shoulder structure allows the cat's front legs to move with exceptional range of motion. It's why cats can extend their front legs far forward when running or leaping, and why they can squeeze through spaces narrower than their shoulder width would suggest. Those powerful hind legs deserve special mention. The cat's back legs are like coiled springs. The thigh bones are relatively short but extremely muscular. The lower leg bones are long and light. This combination allows for tremendous acceleration and jumping ability. A house cat can jump roughly 6 times its body length from a standing start. The muscular power, combined with perfect balance and those sharp claws for grip, makes cats exceptional climbers and leapers. Speaking of claws, these are another evolutionary marvel. Cat claws are retractable, kept sheathed when not in use. This serves multiple purposes. Sheathed claws don't make noise when the cat walks, allowing for silent stalking. They don't wear down from contact with the ground, staying sharp for hunting and climbing. and they're available instantly when needed. The cat simply extends a small bone in each toe, and the claw emerges, ready for action. The claws are also continuously growing and self-sharpening. As the outer layers wear away or get pulled off during scratching, new sharp layers are revealed underneath. This is why cats scratch, not to sharpen the claws so much as to remove the worn outer layers and reveal the fresh claw underneath. It's also a way to mark territory, as the scratching leaves visible marks and deposits sent from glands in the paws. The cat's hunting behavior integrates all these adaptations into a devastatingly effective predatory strategy. The typical hunting sequence goes like this. First, the cat detects prey, usually through a combination of sound and motion. The ears swivel to locate it. The eyes lock on. The cat freezes, going absolutely still except for those ear adjustments. Then begins the stalk. The cat lowers its body, distributing its weight across all 4 feet to avoid making noise. It moves in a characteristic creeping motion, slow and deliberate, each paw placed carefully. As the cat gets closer, you might notice that distinctive behavior, the wiggling hindquarters. Scientists believe this might serve to test the ground for stability before the leap, or it might be a way to ensure all the muscles are engaged and ready. Then comes the pounce. The hind legs uncoil explosively, launching the cat forward. The front legs extend, claws out to grab and immobilize the prey. If the cat succeeds in catching the prey, the killing bite follows. A precise bite to the back of the neck that severs the spine or causes fatal damage to the brainstem. All of this happens in seconds. From detection to death can be less than 5 seconds for an experienced cat hunting familiar prey. It's an ancient dance, refined over millions of years, and it happens whether the cat is hunting a real mouse in a barn or a toy mouse on a string in your living room. The instinct runs that deep. And here's one of the most fascinating aspects of cat hunting behavior. It's not entirely driven by hunger. Cats hunt because they are compelled to hunt. The behavior is intrinsically rewarding, triggered by the presence of prey-like stimuli regardless of whether the cat is hungry. This is why well-fed house cats still hunt, still bring home prey, still pounce on toys with deadly seriousness. The hunting instinct is not merely about obtaining food. It's about following an imperative written into their very DNA, a compulsion that predates their relationship with humans by millions of years. This separation between hunting and eating makes biological sense. As solitary hunters, cats couldn't afford to wait until they were hungry to hunt. Prey might not be available when hunger struck, so they evolved to hunt opportunistically whenever prey was available, and to eat when food was available, whether they had just hunted or not. This is why cats are nibblers, preferring to eat many small meals throughout the day rather than 1 or 2 large ones. In the wild, a cat might make 10 to 20 kills a day, eating small amounts from each. These adaptations, the exceptional senses, the flexible body, the explosive muscle power, the instinctual hunting behaviors, these are what made cats successful long before humans entered the picture. They're also what makes cats such unusual house pets. Unlike dogs, which we've bred and shaped for tens of thousands of years to suppress or modify their wild instincts, cats retain nearly all of their wild behaviors and physical capabilities. A house cat placed in the wild can, and often does, survive by hunting. Feral cats demonstrate this constantly, living independently without any human support, using all these ancient tools to feed themselves and reproduce successfully. This unchanged nature is part of what makes cats mysterious. We've lived alongside them for thousands of years, but they've never really needed us. They've agreed to share our space, but on their own terms. And all these adaptations, these tools of survival, they're still there, still active, still shaping how your cat moves through the world. When your cat sits motionless, staring at a blank wall, it might be using senses you don't possess to track something you can't detect. When it races through the house at midnight, it's driven by instincts that remember hunting under stars in ancient deserts. Understanding these adaptations, appreciating just how refined and specialized cats are as hunters, helps us understand why they behave the way they do. It also helps us appreciate what happened next in the story, as these wild, self-sufficient hunters began to occupy a special place in human culture, particularly in one of history's most remarkable civilizations. Let's travel now to ancient Egypt, where cats would become not just tolerated hunters, not just useful pest control, but sacred beings, symbols of divine power, and beloved companions to one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. Sacred companions, ancient Egypt. The relationship between cats and humans reached an extraordinary zenith in ancient Egypt. Here, in the lush Nile Valley, cats transcended their role as practical pest controllers and became sacred animals, symbols of divine power, and deeply valued members of society. The story of cats in Egypt is a story of cultural elevation, of religious significance, and of genuine affection between humans and animals that has left echoes down through the millennia. The timeline is important. Evidence suggests cats were present in Egypt quite early in its history, certainly by the time of the Old Kingdom around 4,500 years ago. Skeletal remains of cats have been found among funerary goods dating to the 12th dynasty, roughly 4,000 years ago. But it was during the later periods of Egyptian history, particularly from about 1000 BCE onward, that cats truly became central to Egyptian culture and religion. The association between cats and the divine in Egypt centered primarily on the goddess Batet, though several deities were depicted with feline features. Batet began as a fierce lioness goddess, associated with the sun god Ra and representing his protective, destructive power. Over time, particularly after 1000 BCE, Bastet's image shifted. She became depicted as a woman with a cat's head, or sometimes as a domestic cat, representing a more nurturing, protective, and joyful aspect of divine power. Batet was the goddess of home, fertility, childbirth, and music. She was a protector, especially of women and children. She was also associated with joy, dance, and celebration. Her main cult center was the city of Bubastis in the Nile Delta, where a massive temple was dedicated to her worship. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Egypt in the 5th century BCE, described an annual festival at Bubastis that attracted hundreds of thousands of pilgrims. The festival was apparently quite raucous, involving music, dancing, wine consumption, and general revelry, very different from the solemn festivals associated with other deities. The connection between Batet and actual cats was direct and powerful. Egyptians believed that domestic cats carried the divine essence of Batet within them. Not that each cat was Batet incarnate, but that cats held a spark of her divine nature. This belief led to cats being treated with remarkable reverence. They were protected by law. Harming a cat, even accidentally, could result in severe punishment. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus recounts an incident where a Roman visitor to Egypt accidentally killed a cat and was lynched by an angry mob, despite the attempts of Pharaoh Ptolemy XII to intervene and save him. In Egyptian homes, cats were cherished members of the family. Wealthy families adorned their cats with jewelry, gold earrings, ornate collars. They fed them the finest foods. When a beloved cat died, the family would go into mourning. According to Herodotus, family members would shave their eyebrows as a sign of grief and wouldn't resume normal activities until the eyebrows grew back. Whether this was universal practice or Herodotus was exaggerating for effect, it speaks to the genuine attachment Egyptians felt toward their cats. The practice of mummifying cats became widespread, particularly during the later periods of Egyptian history. Millions of cat mummies have been discovered at sites throughout Egypt, particularly at Bubastis and Saqqara. These mummies served different purposes. Some were beloved pets, carefully prepared and buried with their owners or in special cat cemeteries. These were often placed in elaborate coffins, sometimes painted to depict cats or inscribed with prayers and dedications. Other cat mummies were votive offerings. Pilgrims visiting temples could purchase a mummified cat to offer to Batet, much like lighting a candle in a church. These votive mummies were mass-produced, with evidence suggesting that cats were bred specifically for this purpose. Kittens were raised in temple catteries, then killed, mummified, and sold to pilgrims. Modern scientific analysis of these mummies often reveals that they were quite young when they died, supporting this interpretation. Still, other mummies may have been temple cats, animals that lived in temple complexes and were cared for by priests. These cats would have been seen as physical manifestations of the deity's presence. When they died of natural causes, they would be mummified and buried with ceremony. The sheer number of cat mummies is staggering. In the late 1800s, excavations at Beni Hassan uncovered a cemetery containing an estimated 300,000 mummified cats. These were so numerous that they were shipped to England by the ton and, sadly, ground up to be used as fertilizer. Only a few specimens were kept for museums. It's a reminder that while the Egyptians revered cats, Victorian-era Europeans saw them primarily as commodities. The process of mummifying a cat was elaborate and varied depending on the purpose and wealth of the person commissioning the mummy. For beloved pets, the process could be quite careful. The cat's body would be dried using natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture. Internal organs might be removed, though not always. The body would then be wrapped in linen bandages, sometimes with the wrappings arranged in intricate patterns. Painted eyes might be added to the wrapping, or the entire wrapping might be painted to depict the cat's features. Some cat mummies were placed in beautifully crafted coffins, sometimes made in the shape of a seated cat, other times rectangular boxes decorated with protective deities and prayers. For votive mummies produced for temple offerings, the process was often less careful. X-ray and CT scan analysis of many temple cat mummies reveals that some contain only partial remains, perhaps just the skull and a few bones, with the rest of the mummy bulk made up of plant material or other padding. Some contain the remains of multiple cats. A few contain no cat remains at all, being entirely fraudulent. This suggests a thriving industry in producing cat mummies for the pilgrimage trade, not unlike the sale of religious relics in medieval Europe. The economic implications of this cat mummy industry were substantial. Cats needed to be bred and raised. Food had to be provided for the living cats. Workers were needed to care for the catteras, to perform the mummification, to create coffins and wrappings. Priests oversaw the rituals. The Temple of Batet at Bubastis would have been a major economic engine for the region, sustained by the constant flow of pilgrims seeking the goddess's favor through cat offerings. Egyptian art depicts cats frequently, and these depictions reveal much about the human-cat relationship. Wall paintings show cats sitting under chairs at banquets, suggesting they were common household companions. They appear in hunting scenes, helping to flush birds from marshes, evidence that Egyptians may have used cats in some hunting activities. Some depictions show cats wearing collars, leashed like small dogs, though how common this actually was remains uncertain. One famous piece of Egyptian art, a limestone sculpture from around 664 to 332 BCE, shows a mother cat nursing her kittens. The piece is remarkably detailed and clearly created with genuine observation and affection. It's not a stylized religious symbol, but a realistic portrayal of feline maternal behavior. Such art suggests that Egyptians observed and appreciated cats not just as sacred symbols, but as living animals with their own behaviors and personalities. The deity most closely associated with Batet was Sekhmet, the lioness goddess. Where Batet represented the gentle, nurturing aspects of feline power, Sekhmet embodied its ferocity. She was a warrior goddess, associated with plagues and healing, destruction and protection. In some theological interpretations, Batet and Sekhmet were two aspects of the same deity, the duality of the feline nature, both dangerous and comforting, wild and domestic. Other deities also took feline form at times. Mafde, one of the oldest known Egyptian goddesses, was depicted as a cat or mongoose and was associated with protection against snakes and scorpions. The goddess Mut could appear as a lioness. Even Ra, the sun god himself, was sometimes depicted as a cat in the Book of the Dead, where he appears as a great cat fighting the serpent Apophis, representative of chaos and darkness. This religious significance of cats had practical implications. Because cats were sacred, they were also protected. This protection extended beyond just legal prohibitions against harming them. Cats were valued, cared for, and their population was supported. This created an environment where cats could thrive in large numbers. Egyptian cities would have been home to substantial cat populations, all doing what cats do best: hunting rodents, marking territory, having more kittens, and generally being cats. The genetic legacy of these Egyptian cats is still visible today. DNA studies have shown that Egyptian cat populations contributed significantly to the spread of domestic cats throughout the Mediterranean and eventually to Europe. When Egypt became integrated into broader Mediterranean trade networks, particularly under Greek and Roman rule, cats traveled aboard ships, spread to new regions, and mixed with local cat populations. The reverence for cats in Egypt may have also encouraged their spread. Exotic animals from Egypt would have had a certain cachet. There's an interesting military anecdote that speaks to how well-known Egyptian reverence for cats was. During the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II supposedly used Egyptian love of cats against them. According to the historian Polyaenus, Cambyses had his soldiers paint images of Batet on their shields and drove cats and other sacred animals before the Persian army. The Egyptians, unwilling to harm the sacred animals or fight beneath the image of their goddess, reportedly surrendered the city. After his victory, Cambyses allegedly threw cats into the faces of the defeated Egyptians to mock them for valuing animals over their own safety. Whether this story is literally true or embellished propaganda, it speaks to how central cats were to Egyptian culture and how this was recognized even by Egypt's enemies. The cat had become more than an animal. It was a symbol of Egyptian identity, a connection to the divine, and a reminder of the forces, protective and dangerous, that governed life and death. But Egypt, despite its long history and cultural sophistication, was not eternal. As the classical period gave way to late antiquity, as Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, the old gods of Egypt were gradually suppressed. Temples were closed, pagan practices were prohibited, and the sacred status of cats diminished. By the 4th and 5th centuries CE, the worship of Batet had essentially ceased. The age of the sacred cat was over, yet the cat itself remained. Cats had spread far beyond Egypt by this point. They had established themselves in nearly every corner of the Old World. They had proven themselves useful, companionable, and remarkably adaptable. Even as their sacred status faded, their practical value ensured they remained part of human society. From Egypt, let's trace the cat's journey outward, following trade routes and human migration, seeing how these animals spread across continents and eventually around the entire world. Let's explore how cats communicated, how they maintained their independence even as they integrated themselves into human spaces, and how they became the global species we know today. The language of cats. Before we follow cats on their geographic journey around the world, we should pause to consider how these animals communicate. Because the way cats talk to us is actually quite different from how they talk to each other, and understanding this distinction reveals something profound about the human-cat relationship. Wild cats are generally quiet animals. Adult wild cats rarely vocalize to each other beyond hisses, growls, and the caterwauls associated with mating. They communicate primarily through body language and scent marking. Posture, ear position, tail movement, the way they hold their whiskers. These convey volumes of information to other cats. The position of the tail alone can signal everything from contentment to aggression, from curiosity to fear. Scent marking is equally important. Cats have scent glands on their faces, particularly around the cheeks, on their paws, and at the base of their tails. When a cat rubs against a tree, a rock, or your leg, it's depositing its scent signature, a complex chemical message that tells other cats, "I was here. This is my territory. This is who I am." Urine marking serves a similar purpose but with different information, often including reproductive status and territorial boundaries. But domestic cats, particularly when interacting with humans, have developed an additional communication channel: vocalization, specifically the meow. This is fascinating because adult cats rarely meow at each other. Kittens meow to their mothers, soliciting attention, food, warmth. But as cats mature, this infant vocalization typically fades when communicating with other cats. With humans, however, it persists and even becomes more elaborate. Researchers believe that cats essentially maintain a kittenish communication style when interacting with humans because they've learned it works. We respond to meows. We pay attention. We provide food, attention, access to desired spaces. The meow becomes a tool specifically adapted for communicating with these strange, largely non-scent-oriented bipeds who seem to need auditory signals to understand what the cat wants. Different meows convey different messages. A short, high-pitched meow often serves as a greeting. A more drawn-out, lower-pitched meow might indicate a request or complaint. Some cats develop quite elaborate vocabularies, with distinct meows for, "I want food," "Let me out," "Pay attention to me," and "I'm unhappy about this situation." Attentive cat owners learn to distinguish these variations and respond accordingly. The meow is not the only sound cats make, of course. There's the purr, that distinctive rumbling vibration that almost everyone associates with contentment. For most of the 20th century, scientists were puzzled about how cats produce this sound. The purr is continuous, happening during both inhalation and exhalation, which seem to rule out the usual mechanisms of vocalization. Recent research has shed light on the mechanics of purring. It appears to involve specialized pads of tissue within the vocal folds. These pads add a layer of fatty tissue that allows the vocal folds to vibrate at low frequencies, typically between 20 and 30 Hz, without requiring active muscle contraction or neural input. Once the purr starts, it sustains itself passively as air flows over the vocal folds. The purr is indeed often a sign of contentment. Cats purr when being petted, when comfortable and relaxed, when nursing kittens. But cats also purr in other contexts. Injured cats sometimes purr, possibly as a self-soothing mechanism. Mother cats purr while nursing, and kittens can purr from just a few days old. Some researchers have suggested that the low frequency of the purr might have healing properties, stimulating bone and tissue repair, though this remains speculative. Then there's chattering or chittering, that distinctive staccato sound cats make when watching prey they can't reach, like birds outside a window. The mouth opens and closes rapidly, teeth clicking, in what looks almost like an exaggerated biting motion. The purpose of this behavior isn't entirely clear. It might be frustration. It might be a predatory reflex, the cat rehearsing the killing bite. It might even be an attempt to mimic bird sounds, luring prey closer, though this interpretation is controversial. Hissing, spitting, and growling are defensive vocalizations. A cat that's frightened or cornered will hiss, pushing air forcefully through the mouth with the teeth exposed. It's a sound remarkably similar to a snake's hiss, and some researchers speculate this might be purposeful mimicry. Many predators are cautious around snakes, so sounding like a snake might be an effective deterrent. Whether this is coincidence or convergent evolution, the hiss is universally recognized as a warning. Back off. Yowling and caterwauling are the drawn-out, loud cries associated primarily with mating behavior in unspayed females and unneutered males. But cats also yowl when in distress, lost, or experiencing pain. Elderly cats with cognitive dysfunction sometimes yowl, possibly due to confusion or disorientation. Body language remains crucial, though. The tail is particularly expressive. A tail held high with a slight curve at the tip usually indicates a happy, confident cat. A tail tucked low or between the legs suggests fear or submission. A tail lashing back and forth indicates agitation or annoyance. A fully puffed up tail, making the cat look larger, is a fear response, the cat trying to appear more intimidating to a threat. Ears are equally telling. Forward-facing ears indicate interest, alertness. Ears swiveled backwards suggest irritation or mild aggression. Ears flattened completely against the head signal fear or defensive aggression. This is a cat ready to fight if necessary. The slow blink is a particularly charming form of cat communication. When a cat looks at you and slowly closes its eyes, then opens them again, it's a sign of trust and affection. Some researchers call it a cat kiss. You can communicate back the same way. Make eye contact with a cat, then slowly close your eyes and open them. Many cats will respond in kind, and some interpret this as social bonding. Kneading, that rhythmic pushing with the front paws that often accompanies purring, is a behavior retained from kittenhood. Kittens knead their mother's belly to stimulate milk flow while nursing. Adult cats need soft surfaces when they're content, often purring simultaneously. It's a comfort behavior associated with warmth, safety, and satisfaction. Many cats need their human companions, though the accompanying claw extension can be uncomfortable for the human involved. Headbutting or bunting is when a cat pushes its head against you. This is scent marking. The cat is depositing scent from facial glands, essentially claiming you as part of its territory and social group. It's a sign of affection and ownership combined. You belong to this cat now. You've been marked as safe, as familiar, as part of the cat's world. All these communication methods, the vocalizations developed for humans, the body language shared with other cats, the scent marking that's invisible to us but crucial to them, create a complex communication system. Cats are simultaneously maintaining their wild communication methods and adapting new ones for interacting with humans. They're bilingual, in a sense, speaking one language with other cats and a modified language with us. This adaptability in communication reflects the broader adaptability that allowed cats to spread so successfully around the world. They could maintain their essential catness, their wild instincts and behaviors, while also adjusting just enough to coexist with humans. This flexibility was crucial as cats began their journey from the Near East and Egypt to the rest of the world, spreading across continents, adapting to new climates, new prey species, new human cultures. Let's trace the journey now, following cats as they spread from their origins in the Fertile Crescent and Egypt to eventually occupy almost every corner of the globe. Journey across continents. The spread of domestic cats from their origins in the Fertile Crescent in Egypt is a story written in genetic markers, archaeological remains, and historical accounts. It's a tale of ships and trade routes, of migration and colonization, of cats being deliberately transported and cats stowing away on their own. By the time of the Roman Empire, cats had established themselves throughout the Mediterranean world. By the Middle Ages, they had reached Northern Europe. By the Age of Exploration, they were accompanying European explorers to the Americas, Australia, and remote islands around the globe. The genetic evidence reveals two major waves of cat dispersal from the Near East and Egypt. The first wave, dating to around 6,400 years ago, spread from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, into Europe. These cats traveled with Neolithic farmers as they expanded across the continent. DNA analysis shows that European cats carry genetic markers linking them to this early expansion. The second wave came from Egypt, beginning around 2,000 years ago during the Classical period. As Egypt became integrated into the Mediterranean trade network, Egyptian cats began to spread more widely. These cats, bearing the genetic signatures of Egyptian populations, mixed with the already established European cat populations. By the time of the Roman Empire, Cats were common throughout the Mediterranean world. Why did cats spread so successfully? The answer is practical. They were useful. Wherever humans stored grain, rodents followed. And wherever rodents congregated, cats could make themselves valuable. Ships were particularly important vectors for cat dispersal. Grain ships carried not just cargo but inevitably rats and mice. Cats aboard ships helped control these pests, protecting the cargo. They became valued members of ship crews. Maritime superstitions even held that cats brought good luck to a vessel. Archaeological evidence supports the importance of maritime trade in spreading cats. Genetic analysis of cat remains from port cities shows clear evidence of the mixing of different cat populations, suggesting that cats from different regions were meeting and breeding in these international trading hubs. From these ports, cats then spread inland to surrounding regions. The expansion into northern Europe took time. Cats are fundamentally warm-climate animals. Their wild ancestors adapted to the semi-arid regions of North Africa and the Near East. Cold, wet European winters would have been challenging. But cats proved adaptable. Longer fur, thicker undercoats, and behavioral adaptations like seeking warmth near human habitations helped them survive in these new climates. The Vikings were particularly important in spreading cats to northern Europe and even to Iceland. Cats appear in Viking burial sites, suggesting they held some cultural value beyond simple pest control. Viking ships traveling between Scandinavia, Britain, Iceland, and even reaching North America would have carried cats both as working members of the crew and as valued companions. Medieval Europe saw cats become widespread, though their status was complicated. On one hand, they were valued for pest control, particularly in monasteries and granaries where large amounts of grain were stored. On the other hand, cats sometimes became associated with witchcraft and devil worship, particularly during the height of the witch hysteria in the early modern period. Black cats especially suffered from these superstitions. Despite this, cats remained common, their practical value ensuring their survival even when cultural attitudes turned against them. The Age of Exploration brought cats to the Americas, Australia, and remote Pacific islands. European ships carrying colonists also carried cats. These cats sometimes escaped or were released and established feral populations. The cat populations of the Americas, for instance, are genetically very similar to European cats, reflecting their origins with European colonizers. In some cases, cats were deliberately introduced to islands to control rodent populations that were themselves introduced by humans. This sometimes had devastating consequences for native island species of birds and small mammals that had evolved without any cat-like predators. The ecological impact of introduced cats remains a significant conservation issue on many islands today. Asia presents an interesting case. While cats from the Fertile Crescent eventually reached parts of Asia via trade routes, genetic studies suggest that Asian cat populations show significant differentiation from Western cats. This suggests that once cats reached Asia, they became relatively isolated, developing distinct genetic characteristics. Interestingly, there's even evidence that in some parts of China, there may have been a brief, independent domestication of a different wildcat species, the leopard cat. Though this doesn't appear to have contributed significantly to modern domestic cat populations. The isolation of Asian cat populations is reflected in breeds that emerged from these regions. The Siamese, for instance, shows genetic markers distinct from European breeds, confirming its Southeast Asian origins. Japanese bobtails have unique characteristics linked to Japanese cat populations, though genetic analysis suggests they've also been influenced by European cats in more recent times. African wildcats, the ancestors of all domestic cats, still exist today in various parts of Africa and the Near East. They continue to interbreed with domestic cats in some regions, blurring the lines between wild and domestic. This ongoing genetic exchange is possible because domestic cats have changed so little from their wild ancestors. A domestic cat can successfully mate with a wild cat and produce fertile offspring, something that wouldn't be possible if the two populations had diverged significantly. The genetic diversity of cat populations varies by region. Populations near the Mediterranean basin, close to where domestication originated, tend to have higher genetic diversity. More peripheral populations, particularly those on islands or in more isolated regions, show lower diversity, reflecting founder effects when small numbers of cats colonized new areas. This global dispersal created a species that, while genetically fairly uniform compared to many domestic animals, still shows considerable variation adapted to different environments and cultures. Cats in Scandinavia tend to be larger and have longer fur than cats in Mediterranean regions. Cats in desert environments may retain more of the lean build and pale coloration of their African wildcat ancestors. Cats in colder climates often have stockier builds and denser coats. Throughout this global journey, cats maintained their essential independence. Unlike dogs, which were actively bred for different tasks and formed integral parts of human working life, cats mostly just did their own thing. They hunted rodents. They had kittens. They established territories. They interacted with humans when it suited them. This self-sufficiency meant that cats didn't undergo the intense selective breeding that transformed dogs into hundreds of highly specialized breeds. In fact, until quite recently in historical terms, there was no such thing as cat breeds in the modern sense. There were cats, varying in size and coat color and temperament, but they were all essentially the same animal. The creation of distinct cat breeds as we know them today is largely a phenomenon of the last 150 years. And it's a story worth exploring because it reveals yet another dimension of the unique relationship between cats and humans. Modern breeds, recent developments. If you visit a modern cat show, you'll see an extraordinary variety. Massive, long-haired Maine Coons that can weigh over 20 pounds. Hairless SPHYNX cats with wrinkled skin and enormous ears. Flat-faced Persians. Short-legged Munchkins. Scottish Folds with their distinctive folded ears. The diversity is impressive, but it's also quite recent, and the way this diversity was created is fundamentally different from how dog breeds developed. The organized breeding of cats into distinct breeds began in earnest in the late 19th century. The first official cat show was held at the Crystal Palace in London in 1871. Only 5 breeds were recognized at that time. Today, different cat registry organizations recognize between 40 and 60 breeds, depending on which organization you ask. Compare this to dogs, where there are over 400 recognized breeds worldwide, developed over thousands of years for diverse tasks from herding to hunting to guarding to companionship. Why the difference? Because humans never needed cats to perform specialized tasks the way they needed dogs. Dogs were bred to herd sheep, guard property, hunt specific types of game, pull sleds, and countless other jobs. Each task required specific traits: size, Temperament, physical capabilities, and intense selective breeding created dogs optimized for each role. Cats, however, only ever needed to do one thing: catch rodents. And they were already perfect at this without any selective breeding. There was no need to create specialized hunting cats or herding cats or guard cats. A cat was a cat was a cat. So while there was some selection for friendly temperament, cats that tolerated human presence were more successful in human environments. There wasn't strong selection for any particular physical traits. The cat breeds we see today were mostly created by selecting for aesthetic traits: coat length, coat color, body shape, ear shape, tail length. These are often controlled by single genes or small numbers of genes. A long-haired cat differs from a short-haired cat by just a couple of genetic variants. The folded ears of a Scottish fold are caused by a single mutation affecting cartilage development. The bobtail of the Japanese bobtail is similarly caused by a specific genetic variant. This is quite different from most dog breeds, which represent complex combinations of traits controlled by many genes. The differences between a Chihuahua and a Great Dane involve hundreds of genetic variants affecting size, bone structure, skull shape, and more. Cat breeds, by comparison, are much more genetically similar to each other. At the DNA level, a Persian and a Siamese are much more alike than a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. Genetic studies of cat breeds reveal this clearly. Most cat breeds show relatively low genetic differentiation from each other and from random-bred cats. The overall genetic structure of domestic cats is one large, interconnected population with some regional clustering, but not the sharp genetic boundaries seen in dog breeds. Many cat breeds can't even be reliably distinguished by DNA alone without knowing which specific aesthetic markers to look for. This has both advantages and disadvantages. On the positive side, the low genetic differentiation means domestic cats as a species have maintained high genetic diversity. They're not plagued by the breed-specific health problems that affect many purebred dogs. On the negative side, some cat breeds have been pushed toward extreme physical traits that can cause health issues. Flat-faced Persians can have breathing problems. Scottish folds, with their cute folded ears, can develop painful joint problems due to the cartilage mutation that causes the fold. Munchkin cats, bred for short legs, may have mobility issues. Some breeds emerged from natural populations before the age of organized breeding. The Norwegian forest cat, the Siberian, the Turkish Angora, and the Turkish Van are considered natural breeds. Regional varieties that developed through natural selection and random breeding in specific geographic areas. These tend to have higher genetic diversity and fewer health problems than breeds created through intensive selective breeding. The Norwegian forest cat, for instance, likely descended from cats brought to Scandinavia by Vikings 1,000 years ago. Over centuries in the cold Norwegian climate, these cats evolved thick, water-resistant double coats, large bodies, and tufted ears and paws. They appear in Norwegian folktales as magical cats strong enough to pull the goddess Freya's chariot. When modern breeders began to standardize the breed in the 1970s, they were working with cats that had already been shaped by their environment over many generations. Similarly, the Turkish Angora and Turkish Van are ancient breeds from the Anatolian region of Turkey. They've been present in that area for centuries, possibly millennia. These cats adapted to the temperature extremes of the region, hot summers and cold winters, developing semi-long coats that provided insulation without becoming too heavy. The Turkish van is particularly notable for its love of water, unusual among cats. This may have evolved as an adaptation to the hot climate around Lake Van in eastern Turkey, where cooling off in water would have been advantageous. Other breeds are quite new, created by deliberately crossing existing breeds or selecting for novel mutations. The Bengal, for instance, was created by crossing domestic cats with the wild Asian leopard cat, aiming to create a domestic cat with a wild appearance. The program began in the 1960s, with the first Bengal registered as a breed in the 1980s. The goal was to capture the exotic spotted coat of the leopard cat while maintaining the temperament of a domestic cat. This proved challenging. Early generation Bengals often retained wild behaviors that made them difficult to live with. Only after multiple generations of breeding back to domestic cats did the Bengal become a truly domestic breed. The Savannah was created by crossing domestic cats with the African serval, a medium-sized African wildcat. First-generation Savannahs, F1S, meaning one parent is a serval, can be quite large, up to 25 pounds, and retain significant wild behaviors. They're athletic, energetic, and require much more space and stimulation than typical house cats. Some jurisdictions regulate or ban Savannah ownership, particularly for early generations, due to concerns about public safety and the potential for escaped animals to establish wild populations. These hybrid breeds are controversial, raising questions about animal welfare and the ethics of breeding wild instincts into animals intended as pets. Critics argue that creating animals with wild behaviors and then expecting them to live in typical home environments is inherently problematic. Supporters counter that careful breeding and responsible ownership can create unique and rewarding companions. The debate continues, with different cat registries taking different positions on which hybrid breeds to recognize. The genetics of coat color in cats is fascinating and has been well studied. The basic wild-type coloration is agouti tabby, individual hairs banded with different colors creating a camouflaged pattern. This is what most African wildcats look like. From this starting point, various mutations have created the rainbow of cat colors we see today. The orange coloration is caused by a gene on the X chromosome, which is why orange cats are more often male. The dilute gene causes colors to appear washed out, turning black to gray, orange to cream. The white spotting gene causes patches of white. The Siamese pointing pattern, where the extremities are darker than the body, is caused by a temperature-sensitive mutation affecting pigment production. Despite the variety in appearance, behavioral studies suggest that cat breeds don't differ as dramatically in temperament as dog breeds do. There are some breed tendencies. Siamese cats are often more vocal, Persians more placid, Bengals more active, but the variation within breeds often exceeds the variation between breeds. A lot comes down to the individual cat, its early experiences, and how it's raised. The modern cat fancy, with its breed standards and cat shows and breeding programs, represents a very recent chapter in the long story of human-cat relations. For 99% of the time that cats have been associated with humans, there were no breeds, just cats. The rise of breeds reflects modern human interests in novelty, aesthetics, and creating animals that fit specific visual ideals. Whether this is good for cats as a species remains debated. Some argue that selective breeding can be done responsibly, maintaining genetic diversity and health while creating distinctive appearances that people enjoy. Others worry that the focus on appearance can lead to health problems and that the entire concept of breeding cats for human preferences rather than allowing natural selection to operate is ethically questionable. What's undeniable is that beneath all the breed variations, the long fur and short fur, the different colors and patterns, the various body shapes, they're still fundamentally the same animal. The genome hasn't changed much. The basic behaviors haven't changed much. A Persian and a Mage from the street are far more similar than different. They're both still cats, still carrying within them the hunting instincts, the sensory capabilities, the independence that their wild ancestors possessed. This retention of wild characteristics, even after thousands of years of living with humans and more than a century of selective breeding, brings us to one of the most interesting aspects of the cat story: the paradox of domestication. The question of whether cats were ever truly domesticated at all, or whether they simply struck a deal with humans and maintained their side of the bargain while never really submitting to our authority. The paradox of domestication. There's a fundamental question that haunts the study of cat domestication. Are cats actually domesticated? It might seem like an odd question. After all, hundreds of millions of cats live in human homes, sleep on human furniture, eat food provided by humans. They're clearly not wild animals. And yet, they're also clearly not domesticated in the way that dogs, cattle, sheep, or chickens are domesticated. Domestication, in the classical sense, involves profound changes to an animal. Domesticated animals typically undergo significant alterations in their behavior, their physical form, and their relationship with humans. They become dependent on humans for food and shelter. They develop traits that would be disadvantageous in the wild but are useful or pleasing to humans. They lose much of their wild wariness and aggression, and they're no longer capable of surviving independently in natural environments. Dogs exemplify this. Domestic dogs have been so transformed by thousands of years of selective breeding that they're classified as a separate subspecies from wolves. Canis lupus familiaris versus Canis lupus for wolves. Dogs have retained neotenic features, puppy-like traits into adulthood. They have dramatically altered skull shapes, body sizes, coat types. They're socially bonded to humans in ways wolves are not. And most critically, dogs are dependent on humans. A dog released into the wild typically doesn't survive long. They lack the skills and instincts to hunt effectively, to avoid predators, to navigate a natural environment. Cats, on the other hand, are classified as Felis catus, a separate species from their wild ancestor Felis silvestris libica, but the genetic differences are minimal. Domestic cats retain almost all their wild behaviors and capabilities. Their skull shape has changed only slightly. They have somewhat smaller brain cases than wild cats, but otherwise the skeleton is nearly identical. Their hunting behavior is unchanged. Their sensory capabilities are unchanged. And critically, domestic cats are perfectly capable of surviving in the wild. Feral cat populations exist around the world. These are domestic cats living without any human support, hunting for food, finding shelter, reproducing, and maintaining populations across generations. Some feral populations have existed for decades or even centuries. They demonstrate conclusively that the domestic cat doesn't need humans to survive. They're not dependent on us in the way domesticated animals typically are. This raises the question: if cats can live perfectly well without us, in what sense are they domesticated? Some researchers argue that cats represent a unique category, Self-domesticated animals. They domesticated themselves by choosing to live near humans because it provided advantages, concentrated prey, possibly supplemental food from scavenging, without requiring them to fundamentally change their nature or become dependent. The behavioral evidence supports this. Cats retain strong territorial instincts. They still hunt, even when well-fed. They maintain solitary social structures. Cats don't form packs or herds. They tolerate proximity to other cats but fundamentally operate as independent agents. They haven't developed the intense social bonding with humans that dogs have. A dog looks to its owner as a pack leader, a social superior. A cat views humans as, well, it's hard to say exactly what cats think of us, but probably not as pack leaders. One theory is that cats see humans as large, clumsy cats. We occupy territory that they consider partly theirs. We provide resources they're willing to accept, but we're not their masters. We're more like roommates. Useful roommates who can operate door handles and tin openers, but roommates nonetheless. This independence is reflected in how cats respond to training. You can train a cat, and some cats are quite responsive to positive reinforcement training. But it's qualitatively different from training a dog. A dog wants to please its owner, enjoys the social interaction of training, and will work for praise as much as for treats. A cat, if it cooperates with training, does so because it finds the process rewarding in itself or likes the treats. The social approval of the human is less relevant. This isn't to say cats don't bond with humans. They clearly do. Many cats show strong attachment to their owners, seeking them out for affection, showing distress when separated, displaying behaviors associated with social bonding like headbutting and kneading. But the nature of this bonding is different from dog-human bonding. It's more on the cat's terms. The cat chooses when to interact, when to be affectionate, when to leave and do its own thing. The genetic evidence for limited domestication is compelling. Studies comparing the genomes of domestic cats with wild cats find relatively few genes showing clear evidence of selection. In contrast, studies of dog genomes find hundreds of genes that have been under selection during domestication, affecting everything from behavior to digestion to reproduction. The genes that do show evidence of selection in cats are interesting. Some affect fear and aggression responses, consistent with selection for cats that were less fearful of humans. Some affect reward-seeking behavior, possibly making cats more interested in interacting with humans for food or play. But overall, the genetic signature of domestication in cats is subtle. A 2014 study comparing domestic cat genomes with wildcat genomes identified just 13 genomic regions showing evidence of selection during domestication. Compare this to the hundreds of regions identified in similar studies of dogs, horses, or pigs. The changes in cats are concentrated in genes affecting neural crest development, the cells that give rise to parts of the nervous system and certain physical features. These same pathways are affected in other domesticated species and may relate to the reduction of fear and aggression that makes animals tolerant of humans. But remarkably, many of the gene systems heavily modified in other domestic animals remain essentially unchanged in cats. Genes affecting social bonding, complex in dogs and strongly selected during domestication, show little change in cats. Genes affecting coat color and pattern show some variation in cats, but nothing like the diversity seen in dogs or horses. Genes affecting metabolism, digestion, and nutritional requirements remain almost identical to wild cats. Cats are still obligate carnivores with essentially unchanged digestive systems. This minimal genetic change has advantages. Domestic cats have avoided many of the health problems that plague highly bred domestic animals. They don't have the hip dysplasia common in dogs, the respiratory problems of flat-faced breeds, the hereditary diseases that afflict many purebred dogs. Random-bred domestic cats, often called magas or alley cats, are typically quite healthy and hardy. The behavioral evidence is equally telling. Scientists studying cat cognition have found that cats don't show the same level of social referencing that dogs do. When faced with an ambiguous situation, a dog will look to its owner for guidance. Should I be afraid of this? Is this okay? Cats don't do this. They assess situations independently and make their own decisions. They don't look to humans for social cues about how to interpret their environment. Cats also don't show the same attachment behaviors as dogs. The famous strange situation test, where an animal is placed in an unfamiliar room, then separated from and reunited with their owner, has been used extensively to study attachment in dogs. Dogs show clear distress when separated from their owners and obvious joy at reunion. Cats, tested in the same paradigm, often seem fine. Some cats show mild stress at separation, but many seem relatively unbothered. The reunion doesn't trigger the intense social bonding displays seen in dogs. This doesn't mean cats don't form attachments. They do. But the attachment is different, less desperate, less dependent, more on the cat's own terms. A cat might be pleased to see you return home, might greet you with a chirp and a raised tail, but it's not the same ecstatic reunion behavior a dog displays. The cat maintained its own life while you were gone and continues that life now that you're back. The recent phenomenon of cats as internet celebrities has revealed something else interesting: the diversity of cat personalities. Unlike dog breeds, which were bred for specific behavioral traits and tend to show breed-typical behaviors, cats, even purebred cats, show enormous individual variation in personality. Some cats are social butterflies, greeting strangers and demanding attention. Others are reclusive, hiding from visitors. Some are playful throughout their lives. Others become sedate as adults. Some are vocal, others quiet. This variation exists within breeds as much as between them, suggesting that much of cat personality is individual rather than genetically predetermined. This individual variation makes sense in the context of limited domestication. Without strong selection for specific behaviors, without intensive breeding programs targeting temperament, each cat retains more of the natural variation that exists in wild populations. Each cat is more of an individual, less of a type. This is part of what makes cats interesting but also challenging as pets. You can't reliably predict what you're getting when you bring home a cat, even if it's from a specific breed. The paradox extends to modern breeding efforts. Even after 150 years of creating cat breeds, breeders struggle to maintain breed distinctiveness. Outcrossing, bringing in cats from outside the breed, is commonly practiced to maintain genetic health. Cat breed registries are more flexible than dog registries about accepting cats of uncertain pedigree. The boundaries between breeds remain porous. All of this points to a fundamental truth. Cats agreed to live with us, but they never agreed to be changed by us. They maintained their essential catness through thousands of years of association with humans. They took what benefits proximity to humans offered, abundant prey, occasional shelter, sometimes food, without sacrificing their independence or their capabilities. This makes cats unique among domestic animals. They're the only species that chose domestication on their own terms and stuck to those terms. We didn't domesticate cats so much as we reached a mutual accommodation. We got pest control. They got easier hunting. Everyone benefited. But the cat never became our subject, our dependent, our creation. The cat remained itself. Understanding this helps us understand cats better as companions. When your cat ignores you, it's not being disobedient. It simply doesn't recognize your authority to give commands. When your cat brings you a dead mouse, it's not offering a gift in the way a dog might. It's likely engaging in hunting behavior that has nothing to do with you at all. When your cat decides it's time for affection and jumps on your lap, it's choosing to interact, not fulfilling some social obligation. This independence is part of what makes cats appealing to many people. They're low-maintenance companions who provide affection and interest without demanding the constant attention and activity that dogs require. But it can also be frustrating for people accustomed to the eager-to-please nature of dogs. Cats are not small dogs. They're their own thing, products of a unique evolutionary and cultural history. The question of whether cats are truly domesticated may never be fully resolved. In some ways, it's a matter of definition. If domestication requires dependence, profound genetic change, and loss of wild capabilities, then cats aren't really domesticated. If domestication simply means living in association with humans and accepting human provision of resources, then they are. Perhaps the answer is that cats represent a different kind of domestication, one that's more flexible, more optional, more on the animal's own terms. What's certain is that cats have succeeded spectacularly. From a small population of wildcats in the Near East 10,000 years ago, they've spread to every continent except Antarctica. They number in the hundreds of millions. They occupy an extraordinary range of habitats, from Manhattan high-rises to Australian outback stations. They've achieved this success while changing relatively little, while maintaining their independence, while remaining fundamentally wild at heart. As we drift toward the end of this journey through deep time, through ancient deserts and fertile crescents, through Egyptian temples and medieval villages, through the age of exploration and into the modern world, we return to where we started, to the cat, curled in a patch of sunlight, eyes half closed, seemingly oblivious to the world, but actually acutely aware of everything happening around it. That cat carries within it the accumulated history we've just explored. The genes of African wildcats who hunted rodents 10,000 years ago. The legacy of cats who stalked mice around the first granaries. The bloodlines of cats revered in Egypt. Cats who sailed with Vikings. Cats who crossed oceans with explorers. All of it, compressed into the small, furry body that seems so ordinary, so familiar, and yet remains mysterious. The evolutionary story of domestic cats is unlike any other. It's a story of mutual accommodation rather than human dominance. It's a story of an animal that found a way to benefit from human civilization without sacrificing its essential nature. It's a story of independence maintained across millennia of close association with our species. When you understand this history, cats become even more fascinating. That strange behavior, that aloofness, that sudden shift from affectionate companion to independent hunter, it all makes sense. The cat isn't being contradictory. It's being itself, expressing instincts and capabilities that have served its species for millions of years. We think we've domesticated cats, but perhaps it's more accurate to say we've learned to coexist with them. They've given us their company, their hunting skills, their purrs and headbutts, and occasionally their fierce loyalty. We've given them shelter, supplemental food, and a place in our homes and hearts. It's been a good arrangement, beneficial to both species. As you drift towards sleep, let that thought settle over you like a soft blanket. The cat story is our story too. We evolved together, shaped each other in subtle ways, created a relationship unique in the animal kingdom. And somewhere, a cat is walking through the darkness on soft paws, eyes gleaming in the night, ancient instincts guiding its path, utterly itself and utterly at home in the strange world we share. If you've enjoyed this journey through the evolutionary mystery of cats, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Sleep well, and may your dreams be as curious and independent as the cats who've chosen to share our world.